So we're here to talk about the San Francisco Federal Building, which is, I guess, a little over 10 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
Does it seem like it's been 10 years, first of all, to both of you?
Well, I actually see the building every day from where in San Francisco. So, yeah, I never thought about it till it was 2017. Like, wow, it has been 10 years. Only because someone reminded me that it was 10 years ago. So I'm like, oh.
Right.
So.
And Morphosis has gone on to do a lot of work since then. So looking back, how does this fit into your portfolio?
Well, it's still definitely one of our major highlights. Mm-hmm. And we always reference and discuss it in the context of new buildings. It always goes back to this building.
Right. Take us back to before it was built. Mm-hmm. From the GSA perspective, what was the mission, the goal, and Morphosis, when you guys got the brief or entered the competition, what did you think and how did you approach it? Maria, you can start.
Well, so, the program was basically build a federal office building, pull everybody out of Class A space out of downtown San Francisco, and then find a site that is in an area of San Francisco that needed money infused to be a catalyst for development. So really the program was first just house 1,200 people, 650,000 square feet. That was the fundamental. But when we thought about it, a federal office building would give us the freedom to think about the workplace, because we thought about designing the building from the inside out. First surveying the employees to see what they would want in a building that they would spend 40, 60 hours a week in. And that's where the genesis was. It wasn't about the shape, it wasn't about geos, it was about how do we create a workplace that actually is healthy and is more productive and then fits in with the Mediterranean climate of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. So how did Morphosis take that mission from the GSA and turn it into the building that you ended up delivering?
We thought it was an incredible opportunity because there's probably two things that was happening within the context. Number one was we were doing a tremendous amount of buildings in Europe where the conversation about being green and sustainability was already cooked and baked into the culture in Europe. And so we were highly influenced by that. And then number two, Tom and basically his entire generation from the 60s, Tom Main, was really interested in the idea of civic leadership and the role of these platforms like government buildings to actually kind of be the leaders in terms of changing the discussion for the public. And so we were doing public schools. And so this was a natural evolution from the public school to a federal project.
Right. To a public building, taxpayer funded, and still delivering very forward-looking, people might call it risky architecture. How did that come into the conversation? Did the GSA want to make an architectural statement? Did Morphosis want to say something about public spaces and buildings with the design?
I think it was a combination of both. Region 9, San Francisco, we're kind of the home of Twitter, Salesforce, Silicon Valley, and the majority of our projects have always looked at sustainability as I said before, when we build for 100 years. So what does sustainability mean for us in the federal government? We've always had that mindset with the projects that we have done before. We looked at a FOB, a federal office building, as a prime opportunity to actually look at changing the culture of workplace. Ours was about looking at that culture of workplace, and then when Morphosis came in, they talked about, hey, what if we look at sustainability, could we actually look at natural ventilation? I'm like, great. Born and raised in San Francisco, that the weather's pretty temperate. Mm-hmm. Come the afternoon, the breezes come up. And so we looked at that as like, that would be a great possibility.
Right. Can you talk about some of the sustainability aspects of it, specifically that natural ventilation, that chimney effect that you try to create along the outside of the building?
Right. So, I think we have to understand this conversation started 2 years before LEED was even launched. Because LEED started like in 2001, and we were talking about this in 1999.
Right.
And the whole idea was how can we do a smart combination of passive and active systems, and primarily it was a lot of passive systems. So old world notions like thermal mass cooling and heating, right? Proportional buildings to basically get natural ventilation going, daylight penetration. And I have to say a lot of this was actually spearheaded by a lot of work that was being done in Europe and by European governments at that time. And we just had to take some of those initiatives and tweak it to a much more kind of focused agenda for the government.
Mm-hmm. This building was also supposed to be a catalyst for development and to revitalize public space, the plaza.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's happened?
The thing about the south of Market, and we're actually in the Tenderloin, I'd say when we first started out, what was interesting is that when we invested the $144 million total in that site, then other either adjacent property owners, they were waiting to see what we were going to invest. Once we started doing that, now there's a new hotel that's going up across the street. A condominium complex was built directly adjacent to our property. But it's still a long haul because more so because of homelessness
mm-hmm.
versus anything about us being catalysts for investment. I mean, we've invested in less than a block over $300 million in 3 of our buildings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so has the city of San Francisco, the Asian Art Museum, City Hall. Yet it's the chronic homelessness that actually is the issue in the area.
And that's gone up since the completion of the building.
It's been tough, and I think it's tough in any city right now. When, you know, I walk around Chicago, when I'm in Honolulu, there are tents everywhere. And so that is a much bigger issue than when people say, well, Maria, you know, has your building been successful? Yes, when given what we knew
mm-hmm.
10 years ago and what we could foresee about development. You know, because there are new hotels, there are new, as I said, Twitter just moved down the street, but because of that chronic homelessness, people don't feel safe walking just a block to get to the metro. So it's a challenge, it's still a challenge.
Is there a place for, you know, big iconic buildings, for lack of a better term, or for architects in general to address homelessness in dense urban environments?
I think the issue of homelessness, I think people have to understand is actually it's a mental health issue primarily. I think a lot of architects like to think of it as just basically, oh, it's just lack of housing, and it isn't. Mm-hmm. It has to do with mental health, management, support, and it's a much more of a chronic issue that's connected to that. My sister works with the homeless, and we have a lot of discussions, and I realize just how, I don't want to use the word helpless, but sometimes that's what I feel in terms of our capacity as architects. It's a much more of an integrated issue than anything else.
Looking back now 10 years later, what do you think the legacy of the building is? Are there things that you've adapted into your practice or that the GSA has taken into either the, you know, inside the space itself, how it's used? You know, 10 years back, how is it being used, and what do you think its relevance is today?
Yeah, it's interesting for me to actually, when we built the building and our vision about having these community spaces that people can use after hours, that we can enliven the plaza with, you know, I don't know, junior high jazz bands and that sort. And it's all about programming. But the architecture was about providing those spaces. You know, to have the child care center on Halloween go through the building and do their deal, and everybody come out of the building and, you know, give them candy or, you know, just cheer them on with their costumes, because the child care center is open to the public. The building's open to the public. People can go up to the Sky Garden. What I found interesting is that we had people that were tourists from around the world. They were standing at we hadn't opened the building yet, but they were standing at the entry, and I go, can I help you? And like, well, your building is in my hotel magazine. So we figured this must be a place to go. I'm like, yes, but we don't have the magnetometers yet for it because it is a public place.
Right.
You can, as long as you go through security, which is, you know, again, foremost for us. I mean, Oklahoma City was our 9/11. That happened in 1995. People don't understand that that building is a level 4 secure building where you have vehicle deterrence, you have many security things that you will never see because it's still a building for the public.
Yeah, can you talk about, from a design standpoint, how you balance that? You want transparency, openness, you want public space that's not just the outside plaza, but is inside, as Maria said, but you also need to have very high levels of security. So how do you do both without one overwhelming the other?
Well, I think you do that through just constructing a very careful narrative of places where people can congregate, where people can have access. I think there's a difference between visual transparency and physical access. So as long as you know how to mitigate that, I think that's fine. The perimeter have these really, really nice, big, fat benches, but the width is actually determined to resist a truck driving into the plaza. And the gaps in between are designed to specifically resist even a motorcycle going through. And so once you have basically this performance dimensions, you could just use that to kind of design something aesthetically pleasing while still satisfying the function. And I think the rest of the building has to do with that didactic expression of function, where every single component I can defend and vet it out on its larger purpose toward a larger singular idea.
Maybe the last question for both of you. It's something we've been asking a lot of people stepping back, and it seems like pretty relevant to this project, but wouldn't have to be specifically referencing the San Francisco Federal Building. And that's, can a building be both iconic and contextually appropriate?
My answer is yes. I mean, the thing about the San Francisco Federal Building, as I had said, San Francisco as a culture, we accept all kinds of people. But architecturally, it's pretty provincial. We have our historic district. Maria, this is Beaux-Arts. How could you possibly put this here? But it's about being grassroots for the people to understand what the building brings to the community. And then when you go to San Francisco and you're up on Telegraph Hill, you have a different vantage point of the building. When you're down at the street and you're looking up at James Turrell's light, art piece, it's another thing. If you're in a car and you're going to the airport, you see another facet of it. I think we have met all of our fundamental needs to have a federal office building. We could have just built, a rectangle and just house people and be hermetically sealed. But with the same amount of money, if we can actually find a partner that can look at those dollars and say, here's what we can do that's even better, that we set the bar. If we can set the bar at the public sector, then that actually is it's a challenge to the private sector. I mean, he's right. It was before LEEDs was ever established. And so we went backwards. We're like, okay, now that we have already designed it, let's just apply. And we met LEED Silver with no criteria. There was no criteria. We just wanted to do great design.
I think the issue is about being authentic. So I love the Court of Appeals across the street from us. But that's about being authentic and true to that moment when that building was done. And I teach history at UCLA. And the moment when all my students wake up is when there's good, honest progression of humanity. And the progression of humanity is about being authentic to each age that you live in. So we are true now to our digital communication age, and this is what we're going to be. I'm not going to be going around with a little rotator of phone on my hand. And it's about how buildings, fashion, music, everything reflects the age we're living in and being authentic to the call of that particular moment in our lives. And the building does that, and in some ways, I would say, accentuates the authenticity of the other buildings that are true to the time when they were created. And collectively, then we all move forward in urbanism.